All right, cool. Well, what's up, everyone? I'm so glad to be here. Today's topic is prepping for the interview, 360 prep. Let's, figure out, how we get prepped for what we need to do during the interview and anything we need to do post interview. So why the heck are they, oops, there we go. So why are they having me talk to you about this? So I'm Madeline Mann. I head up HR and recruiting at a tech startup in LA. And, just through my job, I see all of the behind the scenes of who hiring managers choose and why. And I go through every resume. I talk to every single candidate. And on the other side, I also, once, people get onboarded into the company, I see who gets promoted and who gets the best projects and all these things. And so I was kind of heartbroken going through all these people's resumes and cover letters. And there was a lot of the same issues that I saw coming up, and even in the job interviews as well. It's like, oh, if I could just be their coach and help them through this, they probably would have gotten this job. And so what I started doing is people would apply to the company and I would reply back with specific feedback on the resumes and cover letters and why we didn't choose them. And this sounds like a very nice thing on the surface, but a lot of people got really mad at me for giving them unsolicited feedback, or they were totally cool with it. But then they were like, okay, I'm going to edit my resume. I'm going to send it back to you. And we're going to get on the phone and we'll talk about it. And so it ended up being just a complete, such a time suck on my time. So I was like, what is a way that I could help people and not be, just kind of sliding into their inbox unannounced. And so what I did is I started a YouTube channel. It's called Self-Made Millennial, but it talks about just modern day interview and career and job search tips, anywhere from, resume tips to how to, kick ass in the interview, all the way to, how to ask your boss for something really big. So I'm so excited to talk to you all today. And that channel has been out for over a year now. And it's just been overwhelming, the amount of messages. I get messages daily about testimonials, about people saying, you changed my life. I got that promotion. I got that dream job. These tips really are what is happening in the modern tech industry, because I feel like a lot of this advice is often outdated. So without further ado, let's kind of jump into some of this stuff. So we'll go through how to prepare your impactful interview responses to all different questions, how to shine once you're actually in the interview, and then some of the must-dos after you interview. Okay, cool. So the one who tells the best stories gets the job. I want this to really sink in. So obviously you'll be doing technical interviews that will be evaluating your skills. And I specifically am not talking about that today. I'm talking more about the other questions you're going to be asked. You're going to be asked lots of other questions about different projects you've worked on and how you work with different people and how you approach problem solving. And the one who tells the best stories gets the job. And I really want you to get this mindset of telling stories is really the way to get through to interviewers. So how do you do that? Well, I built a story toolbox, right? So everyone should build their own story toolbox. And what I mean by that, for me, what it looks like is it is a document of like different accomplishments and different like kind of interesting situations I've been in at my past few jobs. And these are things that I can then talk to and show insights about my character through these stories. So the way you kind of assemble this story toolbox, and I'll talk a little bit later about how then you actually pull these things out and impress the pants off these people, is you write down notable accomplishments. So like I said, anything cool you've done, small or big, any time that you had to take initiative or something went terribly wrong and you helped fix it, anything. Write down all of those notable accomplishments. Then also think of some difficult interpersonal situations, right? Where there's conflict on your team, where you and your manager weren't seeing eye to eye, where your manager was very absent and you had to overcome that. Just write a few of those down because, they ask about that stuff. And always write down a few mistakes or failures, places where, you really had to, learn on the job. You made a wrong turn, but how you fixed it. So make sure to write at least one of those down. So you have all these things written down, right? And like in my first round interviews with engineering candidates, I always ask them, my goal is always to figure out why they are for this job versus try to disqualify them. Like I always try to build them up and find all the reasons why they would be great. And the number one thing I look for, especially if maybe they don't have as much experience in the space, maybe they're doing a career transition or something, I look for an achiever pattern. And what that means is they have a history of going above and beyond and doing really well at each job that they were at, whether or not it's the same expertise that they are pursuing in this new job. And so the question I ask is, tell me about an accomplishment that you're really proud of from your last job. So this is a softball question, and you would be amazed at how much candidates just let it wither away. And the reason is that they're not telling stories. So the typical answer that I get is, my biggest accomplishment in my last role, I built this complex feature and it took I did it, in the timeline. And what the feature was, it was a social feature where you could edit a photo with your friends at the same time. And you could do this. And then they start like explaining what the feature is. And so, they had the answer, and that's a decent answer, but it didn't tell a story. So what they didn't do in that situation is they didn't start from the beginning. So with you, when you're answering these kinds of questions, you want to have a PAR approach. So you start with the problem, right? So I was brought onto this company, and within, 4 weeks of joining, the lead moved away and left. And so I was then, since I showed leadership, the team thought that I should then become the lead. And so I had to take things over. And it was this really complex social feature that I had to build. So you're kind of you're building up wow, this is the way things were before I came around. Then the action, right? So what were some of the things you did? So the first thing I did is I got everyone in a room and we, did this and built this and we ran into these really tough things along the way, but I ended up solving it and being able to scale it because I found out these things and learned on the job. And then you talk about the result. So, and then, we launched the feature and it ended up being, increasing the users, daily active users. And, you just say something about what were the results. And so by doing this, you're like, wow, this person is an achiever. This is I can see myself working with this person because they just took me through a story where they explained how they think and how they, how they approach problems. So that's really what interviewers are asking. They want you to tell them a story, and all of these questions are kind of indirect ways of getting to that. So yes, PAR, problem, action, result. Now, the thing is that people think that, the question I said, tell me about an accomplishment, that one could be interpreted as not a story, right? But it's more, you can see more how it would be a story, but there's other questions that people ask where it doesn't sound like they're asking for a story, but they actually are, such as, what is your greatest strength, right? You could just name something. You could just say, I'm a quick study. I learn really fast. Okay, tell a story. When did you have to learn quickly? So you shouldn't just say I'm a quick study. You should then have a story of a problem, action, result where you were that quick study. I mean, it's the same as greatest weakness, right? What's your greatest weakness? You don't say, I'm horrible at attention to detail. You don't just stop there. You actually say, hey, so yeah, actually when I first started this job, like I wasn't really familiar with like how to work with a product manager. Like it was just, something kind of, I never really had that like, one-to-one relationship. And then you kind of talk about how you gain those skills and learn those things and the results of that. And so I think if you just start getting this mentality of answering most questions as a story, you come across as much more impressive, and people can better understand what it feels like to work with you. And even how do you handle stress and pressure? That's another question that people love to ask. And again, just talk about a stressful time that you had and problem, action, result. So I hope I've hammered this point enough. But it really is like, I've seen hiring managers before being like super unsure about candidates because they just don't feel like they got to know that person very well. And a lot of it is because they haven't heard those stories where they have the details and they show that behavioral kind of the way people approach tough situations. Okay, feeling good? All right, so we're going to move along from that then. So build your story toolboxes, have those accomplishments, and then, be ready to talk in problem, action, result for a lot of different questions. Good. All right, so the next thing that really a lot of hiring managers reject candidates on, and it is so heart-wrenching, is rambling. So being really long-winded when you're asked a question. And the reason why it's so tough is because some of these calls that you'll be on will be maybe 30 minutes and they have to get through a bunch of questions. And so if you spend 10 minutes on their first question, that's a third of the interview. Like, I don't think they're going to get through the rest of them. And so it's super important that we're all being efficient when we're on the phone or in an interview, that we are being concise. And there's just a lot of, especially the higher up in roles you get, being concise, being an excellent communicator. It's just, there's like, for example, I'll tell you an example later. So how long should an interview question, how long should it take you to answer an interview question? Now, I realize I can't see any of your responses, but think about it. How long do you think it should be in your head? And what I have seen is an effective amount of time is 60 seconds. So you should be able to answer any question in 60 seconds. Now, sometimes I realize it's a longer question, and you might stretch this whole thing to 90 seconds. But really keep it tight and focus on just 60 seconds. And the way you do that is you ask clarifying questions. So someone might say, what do you think of your company's project management process? Okay. Wow. Like that could be a massive answer. You could go on forever. And so the way I would respond is, there's several things I could say about it. Do you want me to talk about the tools and technology we use to manage it, about like the accountability on the team? Or would you like me to talk about like cross-department communication? So now you're clarifying, what are you actually asking? Because usually they have a reason for asking, and it's not totally clear in the interview question. And so before you start answering, ask another question. And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, I realized that was so vague, so let me clear that up for you. Another question could be, do you have experience with JavaScript? For that, it's like sometimes when they ask questions like that, it'll be like either just a total check the box question. It's just like yes or no. Like, do you have that experience? Or sometimes it's like they were really looking for you to explain something like, an in-depth project you did using JavaScript. So what you can do is go, yes, so some of my best projects have been in JavaScript. I'm very comfortable with it. Is there anything in particular you're looking for with that experience? And so you're asking a follow-up question, you're addressing their question, but not assuming it's going to be this massively long thing that you need to talk through. So always ask those clarifying questions. Another thing I always do is if I find myself talking for a long time as a candidate, I'll just interrupt myself and I'll go, is this the direction you were hoping I would take this question? And just that check-in. Sometimes people are like, yes, no, keep going. And other times they'll be like, well, what I was more focused on is this. And so that also can totally save you. And it's very difficult on the phone, right? You don't really see people. So hopefully, you get to do some sort of video thing or in person where it'll be a lot easier. If they kind of stop nodding as much, you're like, okay, maybe this isn't the direction they were looking for. So this is huge. And yeah, just a lot of candidates take up a lot of time on answering. Obviously, I feel like some roles, maybe outside of engineering, maybe have this problem a little bit more. I'm not trying to say we should just be super, terse and just answer one word. You never want to do that. But, to keep it to 60 seconds, sometimes you need to ask clarifying questions. All right. So let's see. All right. So now let's get into some more interview prep tips. So what's so important is, and I feel like you all probably know this, but I want to give you a few extra tips on it and really emphasize it, is to research the company and the interviewers. So researching the company seems obvious, right? But you would be so surprised at how many engineers hop on the phone and they're like, wait, which company is this? Who are you? It's so amazing how little research you need to do to be better than that, right? Like how you can just be like, oh yes, I know what your product is and I downloaded it. I downloaded the app and I saw it. Like even that stands out so much more than all these other people. So really take the time to just, do some quick research. It literally takes you like 10 minutes. And that really stands out. Now, the thing that a lot of people don't do is research the interviewers. So this is something you should always do is ask for a list of the people who will be interviewing you or get their names ahead of time. And that's a very common request. You shouldn't feel weird about asking that. And it's so easy these days. I mean, just a quick search on LinkedIn or GitHub or whatnot, you can just find these people really quickly. And some of the context I like to pick up is just what are their past companies? So I'll notice things like, oh, wow, they were at a massive company before and now they're at a startup. Like I'm going to ask them a question about that transition. Or they've been at the company for 3 years. Oh, I'm going to ask them a question about how things have changed over the time that they've been at the company. You notice these things about them that are very rudimentary, but show that you are taking time to get to know something about them. And we once had one of our engineers who's one of, he's with us to this day, is he came into his interview like having read blog posts of different people and really brought all that stuff up in the interviews. And for the longest time, that was constantly brought up that he was the one who really showed up and knew everything. So it leaves a really lasting impression. It's just so incredible how, there's a lot of things that in the interview process that you'll get smashed for like immediately, like they'll reject you and it's so unfair. But then there's also other things where it's like such an easy win. And like, this is such an easy win. So just make sure you do some light research, what's the product, how big is the company, and who are the people who are working there, and maybe something interesting about their background, and weave that into your conversations. It's perfect. So get that done. So how many of you have been told that you need to ask questions in the interview? I'm sure probably a lot. And it's kind of like this, and if you haven't been told, there's always this time at the end of the interview where an interviewer will go, well, so do you have any questions for me? And they always expect you to ask something. And the reason being is they expect you to be vetting this opportunity as much as they are vetting you, right? All of the high quality candidates are pretty, particular about where they're working. And one way to show that you are someone who is taking this decision very seriously is by asking some probing questions. And now it can be tough sometimes because like for me, when I'm interviewing people, I'm very thorough with explaining the company and the role and stuff. So there might not be a ton of questions that immediately come to mind. But I'm going to give you a few right now that you can use and that pretty much, can work for most situations. So the first type of question you should ask is about the role, who was in this role before? Is this a new role or are you backfilling to kind of understand, okay, is the company growing or does someone fail in this role and being replaced? And maybe why did they fail? These are some very interesting probing questions. Or what are some of the biggest challenges for this role, right? What are some of the business goals and how does this role address those? That one, oh my God, that always gets them, super mouth-watering. Like, wow, that's such a great question. So definitely use that one. So always relating it to business goals. People love that. So ask about the team. There's a lot of things you can ask about the team. A simple one is just, what does the team structure look like? Who would this role be reporting to? Just kind of getting understanding what is the makeup of the team. Every team is different. So I found a lot of people make a lot of assumptions about the way a team is structured, but just make sure you don't make those assumptions. Ask about the company, right? So, one thing that, you don't want to ask questions that you can easily find online, but one thing that is definitely could be asked is, what does it mean to be a culture fit here? Okay. So that's, you might have said, hey, I read some things on your website, but what do you feel it means to be a culture fit here? And get that understanding. And that will be really imperative to understand in your future interviews, so that you can understand, okay, what do they actually value? What are they looking for besides obviously being talented and having certain skills, but what does it mean to fit in here? So that's good. And then ask about the interviewer. So while this is informational and may help you, get better context about the company, also you want to get the interviewer talking about themselves, feeling really good, feeling like they're building a bond with you. And so you really want to ask them, like, what do you really like about working here? Or how has your role evolved in X amount of time? So this is where you've come in, right? You've already done your research on these people ahead of time. And you ask them, okay, so I saw you've been at the company for a year and a half. Like, how's your role evolved in that time? And that is like, oh, wow. So, it's like such a simple piece of research you could have done, but then they get to talk about themselves and their experience. And that is a great way to really build that rapport with them. And then you can bring it up later in your follow-up emails. So ask questions. And obviously there's going to be a lot more that you're going to come up with that are important, but these are kind of these blanket, like if you're ever get to the end, you should just have these written down and just be like, okay, I'm just going to ask one of these just so I can show that I am, proactively investigating this opportunity. All right. So let's talk about after the interview. So it's kind of like, if you've ever, a common thing is after, if you've gone on a date, you like text that person after everyone's gone home, just saying, hey, I just want to say I had a really great night. And that kind of like confirms, because people, when they're like face to face, they'll be like, oh yeah, like great, we should do this again. But then you're like, did they actually mean that? And then when they go home and actually write it down, it feels like you've kind of solidified that bond. And so it's the same thing as a job interview. So make sure you write a thank you email. And don't overthink this. A thank you email is really, for each person who you talk to in the interview, make sure, as soon as you hang up, you have 24 hours to write this thing. Okay? Like the clock is ticking. So, if you wait longer than that, I mean, you can still write it, but it's just, you're dampening the momentum. So, and what you write in it is, hey, Steph, great chatting with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me yesterday. I'm really excited about this opportunity, and I look forward to next steps. Something like that. And if you want to go pro level with this, you bring up something in the conversation. Like, I know we talked about XYZ. I actually have an article that I loved on this topic. Here's the link. So when you're continuing conversation, that makes it feel a lot more authentic. And like I said, send this to every single person. When I do interviews and I, meet the receptionist, I send him or her an email afterwards saying, thank you so much for helping me. Like, these things, people want to work with nice, cool people who want to work with them. And so thank you email shows that interest. Then you want to follow up. So there's this, you will do an interview and days will go by and you'll be like, okay, did I make it past? Where am I? And the thing to know is if they haven't rejected you, you are not rejected yet. And same thing as if they haven't given you an offer, you don't have an offer yet. So I guess my point is, don't assume anything. So it's so important that you do follow up. So some people feel like they're being extremely annoying when they follow up, right? It's like, oh my God, these people are obviously so busy. Why should I bother them? And actually following up shows that you are a go-getter. It shows that you want this opportunity, that you're persistent. And a lot of companies would prefer that type of person than someone who is passive and someone who just waits for things to happen to them. Because, I always love it to pay attention to candidates who are like, hey, look at me. I really want this role. Can you get back to me? And so one thing that people often struggle with is, okay, like, how do I word this? How do I make sure that I'm articulating the follow-up and the correct way? And so I believe the link is already shared with you all. And if it isn't, I'll make sure that is shared with you. But I have a free PDF download for you all to have, which gives you 4 email templates. You can just copy and paste these suckers, pop them into your email, follow up with these people. Makes it so easy. And that will be really great to help you. And I think you should follow up every 3 to 5 business days. I usually err on 5 business days, but it depends on if they had promised you sooner and, you just want to follow up as soon as that time has passed that they promised you that they would follow up. And then follow up 3 times before giving up. So use those templates to make sure that you are making sure you're really following up. Cool. So I wanted to kind of give this overview so that I had time to answer all of your questions. But if you want to find me, I have over 70 videos on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/selfmademillennial. I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. If you could just write a little note saying this is how you found me, I will connect with you much faster. And you'll have the free download. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, while you were going through, people are dropping questions and
Cool.
talking about how great your content is. So a couple of the questions talk about, how do you go about crafting a story?
So when you have this PAR scaffolding, right? Problem, action, result. And, if you just take a story, we launched a product, right? Okay. Just try to get back to the pain. Always start with, when I say problem, I mean this pain, this need, right? You always want to show that you're solving something that existed. And, maybe it was something more of a personal project, right? That maybe there wasn't this massive business need, but, I noticed that this problem happened, and the reason why no one had done it before was because there's these issues with creating some sort of, tool or application to address this. So you kind of show why what you were doing was difficult or important, right? So try to pick those things out. then you want to talk about, I think a lot of people forget to brag too. So it's like, if you were selected as like the lead, or if you, worked really hard or really long on something, like make sure you acknowledge that and kind of use that in your story, and any other interpersonal things like, I had a chance to like work with the CEO directly, and he complimented me on this. Like for me, it feels super weird, but to just like talk about how people have complimented me. But that's actually what, like when I am interviewing someone, I am like rooting for them. I'm like, tell me more things where I can like sell you internally. So you kind of talk about the action, some of the interesting things that come up. And this is where also like you can kind of check in with the rambling, where you can be like, and then we had this issue with, the data pipeline. Do you want me to go into detail with that, or should I just, keep finishing the story? So maybe they're like, oh my God, tell me about the data pipeline, or just keep going. And then make sure that, you talk about really what some of those results were. So that's generally what exists on your resume, is the results, and just kind of really bring it full circle about why, that was, something that was important, or, move the needle.
No, it's good to hear that from like a recruiter's perspective, because it's like when you're in the interview, it's like you're just talking and you don't know what's going to like land with them. So what you were talking about earlier of how like to do those check-ins and like make sure you're still on the right track and you're talking about something they're interested in hearing, like that's awesome. Another question kind of in relation to crafting stories is, do you have tips for crafting stories when your prior job history is lacking but not experience?
Is lacking and not experienced?
So it says when your prior job history is lacking, but your experience isn't lacking. I think what he means by that is maybe like so with our students here, like they usually like some of them, it's the first time of them diving into being a developer is being at Lambda school. So it's like, how can they like talk about their like 6-8 months at Lambda school? Let's see if he like responded. Here we go. I have experience in the area, but it's not reflected with job history.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. So yeah, you have a lot of experience. And I also think that I don't really believe that to have experience, you need to have some company say, I'm going to pay you a salary. I'm going to pay you for this. Like experience is experience. You are a software engineer if you know how to build stuff and you've built stuff on your own. So I think that there's certain stories that can depict your character and other stories that can depict your skills. So I think, I think that there's a lot of things that are project-based or, that you can focus on. I've also heard, people even just remark like, how do you react in stressful situations? Be like, I realize this is not related to software engineering, but I used to work in journalism, and we had these extreme deadlines, and so I did this, and this, and then, I was able to save the day. And this is actually the way I work in all aspects of my life. This is the way I approach software engineering as well, is there's similarities. And then you kind of draw like this through line. So it might just be, the through line is that, you are someone who doesn't stop until the work is complete. And so that could be the tale. And stories like that are very compelling because a lot of times, like with questions like that, they want to see your character.
Yeah. And I know like with a lot of our students, if I could probably venture to say all of our students have a non-traditional background. Mm-hmm. And so it's like taking experiences and like talking about your character of like, I forget who it was. One of the students was a yoga instructor, is a yoga instructor. And so it's like he would use experiences like becoming a teacher and being an instructor and like would tie that into his like becoming a developer journey. And then, I don't know. So it's like, it makes the person more interesting too. Because it's like, okay, like I can see like your background, who you are as a person, and then also to see like all these like fun experiences, like whether it be life or job experiences, all tie into like where you're at now and how you can contribute to the company. So.
Exactly. I like that. Yeah, you're kind of drawing a through line of like, and what I realized is that in when I was doing the yoga is that I really, when I find something and that I'm really focused on, like I can just get in the zone and I can do it for hours. And like, that's the way I am in software engineering too, is I just get in this flow state. And like, and so the only time I've ever felt the way I do when I do yoga is when I'm like coding and, like, so it's kind of this, it shows that you're a very like holistic person.
Gosh, you are a pro. I just got over there and then you've already like drawn it into software development. Okay, so here's another question. What's your opinion on thank you cards versus emails following the interview?
Yes. So I've looked up research on this. So as far as like people, like there was a study done on what people prefer as far as thank yous go. Thank you notes did rank pretty high, but like actually nothing beat email. Like email just won straight out.
Really?
I think thank you notes, thank you cards has this like this unexpected element to it, this unusual element that I think is really wonderful. So I think that I think you should go for it if that's your style. I'm like very into getting the message there within 24 hours. So that can sometimes, snail mail can sometimes make it an issue. But I mean, so yeah, it was email, then it was snail mail, then it was phone call. No one likes phone calls. I'll just tell you that right now. I actually, quick story is when I first started at GEM, I would call every candidate when we rejected them because I thought that was the respectful thing to do. And then I went and I told the engineering team that that's what I did. And they go like, you're savage. Like, why would you call someone? And then they have to react on the phone. And what I came to find is people don't like to react on the phone to things. And so it's better to like offer to talk on the phone after you reject them. Like, hey, like, we decided to pass. If you want to talk more about this, I'm happy to hop on the phone. But yeah, the phone is, no one likes it.
Oh gosh. Well, it's like, yeah, when you think about it, you're like, oh, it's always like nice to like let people know like where they're at in the process. And like, yeah, no, it's good to, oh yeah, somebody posted a call will make them think they're getting hired.
Right. Yes. That's exactly the point is call means good. And that's what I came to find through my like little research is that call means good. And so you're scheduling like this time to talk to them to reject them. And it's bad.
Oh no. Okay, actually like kind of dovetailing off of the thank you card email. So we do have an instructor, if anybody's worked with him, it's Dustin Myers. He talked about how what he would do is after his in-person interview, he'd go out to his car, write a thank you note, and then go back in and drop it at the front desk and then leave. And then it would get delivered. So it'd be immediate, but then it has a surprise of like a handwritten note. So like, what's your kind of thoughts on that?
I think that solves for my one hang up on the physical notes. I think that's perfect. Because yeah, then it also, the way that he's describing he did it, like I've heard of people like writing the thank you notes before the interview's done.
Oh, yeah.
Or like before ahead of time and then just handing them out. So it's like, that's not authentic. So I think that's pro level. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, like, and then that's what he's told me too. He's like, yeah, every time I've done that at a job, I've gotten an offer for that job. Cause then like, he'll go to his car and he'll like specifically write out to who he was talking to in the interview. He'll like reference what they talked about and like, hey, I really like talking about the new talking about React language and like what more I can learn on it and like, and whatnot. So it's like, it was very pointed to like exactly what they were talking about. But yeah, his suggestion was like, just make sure to drop it off the front desk secretary person, and then hurry up and run out so you don't like accidentally run into the interviewers again. Right. They're like, wait a minute, why are you back in here?
Right. Your interview's done. Yeah, I the number one thing that like recruiters, like when there's ever a tie between two candidates and they're trying to decide, the deciding factor is who wants it more. Which candidate wants this job more? Pick that person. They'll work harder for you. They'll stay longer at your company. So if you can show that you want it more, you're going to pull ahead likely.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So I'm going to do a last call for questions in the thread. And then if not, I already dropped the link in Slack for the PDF download. It is awesome, super helpful. I'm sure it'll make you feel too like more control over, I mean, there's not a ton of control you have over the interview process or what happens after, other than what you did in like the phone interview or in person. So I love the download, because it feels like, at least for me, I'm like, okay, cool. Like I'm doing something. I like know what to
Right.
do next. But
Yeah, that's the number one thing that people, I get emails all the time, and I realize how paralyzing it can be sometimes about how do I phrase this to an employer? Is it okay if I say this? Those are actually probably the number one questions I get, is like me, like, people like writing what they're going to say, and is that okay? And so I'm actually coming out with like an ebook where it's like every like email you would need in the job search process, and where it's, again, it's very similar to this, where it's like copy and paste. So that'll probably be out in like a week or so.
awesome. Okay, well, I think we are all good on questions, so we can just wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with us today. This was
Yeah, this has
super
been
informative.
fun.
Yeah. So students, I have dropped all the information in the brown bag Google Doc, Madeline's LinkedIn profile. Make sure to include a note. Always include a note when you're sending an invite, unless it's a classmate. And yeah, so if you have any questions, you can get a hold of her there or check out her YouTube channel. So
See you on the internet.
yeah,
Bye.
thanks everyone. See ya.